what I've got there is a screenshot of a drag and drop. You get instant feedback. So immediately there, once we've got interaction and instant feedback, we can start seeing opportunities of how the flipped asynchronous environment can become a lot more productive. Now, down the bottom, I've got some logos which are the more sort of well-known flip learning tools, sorry, rapid authoring tools that we might have heard of. So I'm using Xerti here, and this is the tool we're using at York. Articulate, David mentioned. H5P I thought I'd include because I saw this has come up on a few Barnleap discussion threads, people starting to use that. And David, actually, sorry, I'm just railroading and magpieing everything from David's presentation here. I know he did a lot of, he's got a blog on H5P, I think, which is really useful as well as a way of getting into the free side of using rapid authoring tools. So this is what they are. They're little tools that bring asynchronous learning to life, and a lot of these vary in terms of their complexity and their cost, obviously, and the amount of time that it takes you to get to grips with some of these. So these are the main differences between them, but there are quite a lot available. So let me give you a quick overview of what the advantages they offer for flipped learning. So as a course designer, I'm a module leader now, and I get full remission at the moment. I'm not teaching, but one of the great things as a course designer was moving away from document-based teaching helped me kind of unclutter. So this image here, I think many people will be familiar with. It's that, you know, cloud storage folder, network drive folder, just stuffed to the gills full of PowerPoints and Word docs. And in many ways, that's great because it's collaborative. You know, if you get a shared drive, you get people adapting materials and sharing their own versions and saving them. And but in another sense, it can be a bit of a nightmare because it becomes very hard to garden. You know, defunct materials don't get deleted, they proliferate, you get version clash. So moving away from document-based teaching and having a kind of fixed series of learning objects really helps streamline everything. We now don't have these folders full of materials. Teachers can adapt if they want, and I can explain a bit more about that, but everything is a lot tidier, which is what I like. One of the big things from a course design point of view about using these. So another advantage is, again, this idea of developing the asynchronous aspects. We're acutely aware now of how different it is teaching on Zoom or Collaborate, but what about the asynchronous side of things? So a big advantage here, I've got a screenshot of a little drag and drop that I've created. So students read a text and then their comprehension is tested through dragging and dropping or entering, you know, gap fills. And you've got the ability to splice the transmission of information with tasks and activities. So rather than skating through PowerPoints or just receiving information, this is punctuated by students actually being cognitively engaged with the material that they're receiving. And just as an extension of that, these two clips here, you can see the one on the left. So these are both from the same activity. I'm doing a listening on a TED about food waste, and the screenshot on the left shows just a quiz that I wanted students to work through. So the feedback allows me to guide students to the correct part of the text or give hints. And all of this is done asynchronously. But the bit on the right is one of my kind of go-to features of these e-learning authoring tools. And that is the text box where students can make notes and save their answers. So you got that ability that we had back in the day where students can annotate their own course book. If they had a physical book, they could annotate that, and we kind of lost that when we went to, you know, MOOCs and online things. But these text boxes there, you can download your answers and bring them to the live sessions. So that suits for more open questions, more critical discussion, anything where you want to take advantage of that classroom atmosphere that I mentioned. So really, this is what I mean by getting that digital classroom, that best of both worlds approach. Okay, there's a clip here from my VLE, and essentially what this illustrates is the separation that you can get for what goes in the live session and what goes in the asynchronous learning. So I'd be interested to get feedback from anyone in the Q&A on this, but one of the things that we found when you try and port across materials that were designed for the old face-to-face 2-hour class, let's say, you might have a page of a course book or a PDF that mixes together. You've got little text, you've got some comprehension questions, you've got some pair work, you've got some open discussion, you've got tasks, and they're all kind of mixed in together. But that kind of doesn't work for these smaller, shorter Zoom sessions that we're using now, because we're constantly jumping backwards and forwards. Oh no, that was for the asynchronous study. No, that's for the discussion. And then we've got to adapt the discussion questions. So the idea of just flipping stuff out, having a separate learning object for your asynchronous content, and then just putting clear critical discussions, open questions, questions that you want to talk about in the live sessions, and keeping them separate really, really helped planning. And it helped the students know what they're going to do as well. So it's just, planning from teachers and students, really. I'll just quit here and I'll just give you a quick example of the kind of thing that I meant. Am I still sharing the screen? Okay. Can everyone still see that? Can everyone see a what is academic writing screen now? Yep. Okay. All right. So, so this is my VLE. This is what the students see for their class, and I've got preparation work clearly marked, and so everything here is what we're going to be talking about in the live session. And I'm talking about academic writing, so it's a bit dry. It's noun phrases, that kind of thing. My button here takes me to my learning objects, and so all the nitty-gritty to do with condensing clauses into noun phrases and academic style. This is now on a learning object. So I've got a little transformation exercise there. I want students here to decide what's an abstract concept and what's a concrete noun. So all these things they're actually quite dry to go through in a class. I don't know if anyone's teaching nominalization isn't my favorite thing to do in a live session. So flipping this out was great, but this is what I mean by clear distinctions between asynchronous and synchronous. So that's your live session discussion. This is what students do to prep, and the boundary, the distinction between them becomes quite helpful. All right, so I'm just going to go back to the slide now. The final thing I just wanted to mention before I go on to some sort of tips, monitoring student engagement. So what most of these tools allow you to do, certainly this is one from Xerti, they allow you to monitor student engagement a little bit more easily. So once students have completed their asynchronous tasks, they get, in this case, a PDF, which tells me how long they've spent on the tasks, what their answers were, what the correct answers were, records their notes. And then if we're keeping e-portfolios or something, they can add these to them. So there's potential there to look at student engagement and to, if you're into kind of grading engagement or anything like that, that gives us an opportunity there. And that's actually a bit easier than it would have been even in face-to-face classes and on campus to monitor engagement. All right, so that was a quick overview of the features. So what are flipped learning, what are e-learning authoring tools, rapid authoring tools? What are their potentials? What can they do? So that hopefully gives you a feel. And if you're a course writer now, if you're involved in course writing, none of this was to take away from David's presentation about, yes, we do need the resources and we do need support and we do need time allocated to these. But one of the things that the point that I wanted to make is these are things that are pretty easy to do and you can do on your own. This is all the stuff here that I did on my own without a team. Teams are great, and I totally echo David's call to have resources put into these. But the thing I wanted to flag is they're not hard to use, and most people, you can get to grips with them pretty quickly. Okay, so things to bear in mind when you are writing with these. So I think Kerith mentioned this yesterday. Weirdly, her SAMR model was in reverse of these. I'm not sure where she got her image from, but which one of ours is? So I've got my substitution at the bottom. So essentially, substitution this is a model that I found really helpful to think about when you are designing digital online tools. What are you doing with your technology? So at the bottom here, which is at the top on Kerith's, but the bottom rung of the ladder here is, are you just transferring your original content onto a digital platform? And when you're at the substitution phase, you're not doing anything else with it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe you just want to save paper. Maybe you just, as we are all online now, apart from Penny, who is still face-to-face, it could be that you just want to substitute stuff and you want to get your old materials onto a digital platform. But be aware of the potential for a lot of these tools is not really being exploited here. One of the things that you could think about is how to go up this ladder and start moving towards this redefinition phase. So are there ways in which you could be getting more out of this? How could you make the materials more interactive? A lot of the times this will take a lot of rewording, or a bit of rewording, but just pasting materials that were designed for the classroom onto a tech platform isn't always the best way to go. So be aware that you need to have a think about what you want to do with the technology. And certainly when I got feedback from the earlier incarnations of my work, there were criticisms because I was not really adding anything with the technology. So I learned how to tweak and how to use the features more to their advantage. So I just want to finish off with some tips. So if you are, a teacher or a course writer or a module leader, and you want to move away from document-based teaching, but you're thinking about where do I start? I've been working with PowerPoints and Word docs and PDFs. There are issues with accessibility, but I don't know where to start. Find out what facilities your institution has. Now, this may sound like a really, really basic thing, but I was surprised when I reached out to my TEL team, the Technology Enhanced Learning team. I didn't know about Xerti. I didn't know we had a supported version at the university, and they started running training sessions. But I wouldn't have known unless I'd reached out. So it's worth asking, what do we have? What do we have subscribed to? Read around what can be test driven for free, and I think this was where I was reading about the H5P in the Bali discussion forum. There is h5p.org and h5p.com. So H5P does many of the things that I've been showing you today, and you can just embed these things in your VLE or create links for students to access them for free. Obviously, if you are going to take online course design seriously, which presumably we all now are, it really needs resources invested in it. I mean, getting a supported version, getting the full version of these software packages, they are investments that we will need to make, but you can test drive most of them free, play around with them, see which ones you like, see if you can get a feel for the interfaces. All right, now I did mention looking at the substitution phase of the model, don't just mindlessly transfer your paper-based materials onto a digital platform. However, it can be a really good starting point. So if you've got some material that works well, start with that and look at ways of transferring it onto a new digital platform using one of these tools, and just think about what you can do with it. You already know the material, it's just the environment that's new. So maybe starting with things that you already know is a lot less intimidating than just staring at a blank canvas of one of these interfaces. As mentioned, just bear in mind what role you want the technology to play. And you don't need to reinvent everything. Just think about whether are you transmitting information? What are your learning outcomes? Do you want to get some interactivity in there? And if anyone attended Peter Welch, I think it's Peter Welch, earlier, one of the TELSIG sessions back in the summer, his session on coding was amazing. It was an hour, but it's not essential, but it's so helpful. If you can learn a bit of HTML and CSS, you can help fix little bugs on pages, even if you're just using VLEs. This is really, really useful. I think there's a Future Learn, which has about a 5-hour course, which is the return on that investment is phenomenal. But don't be put off by it. None of these rapid authoring tools that I'm talking about need coding. They do take a bit of a learning curve, but a little bit of coding just helps if you can, if you can find the time to get that in. And again, I think this is something David touched on as well, just collaboration. Even if you're not in the position where you can get resources allocated, you want to get official remission granted, but just see if there are other people who are interested in the department. Can you get an informal team together? Can you pilot each other's materials? Can you give feedback? Maybe start a group Padlet. I think one of the things that I was struck here by in the TELSIG forum is the supportiveness of everyone. This is a really supportive, interested, collaborative team of people. One of my suggestions was going to be perhaps I think there's a Teams platform we've got here. We could have a kind of SIG within a SIG, maybe, of people who are interested in starting with these materials and need some support, would like advice, quick answer questions, that kind of thing. But anything you can do to get some collaboration going there would always really help. And that's pretty much the end. I think I'm bang on 20 past now, so I'll hand over for questions. But what I will do, I'll put some links in the chat box to the ones that I've just showed you about the nominalization. So if you want to have a play around, have a click, and I think they're blown open to everyone now. I've changed the permissions, but if you do get any access problems, just drop me a line or drop me an email. That's fine. But if you have a play around with these in your own time, then you can see kind of what I mean by what these tools can do. That's my references there. Okay, thank you very much for listening. And if anyone has any questions.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was really, really insightful. Using Xerte and similar programs to create digital objects like that was something that we considered as well. We ended up taking the more sort of document-based teaching route this summer. I guess because there was such a fast turnaround time, we had to move everything online so quickly. So I'm just wondering, in terms of using programs like Xerte and becoming accustomed and savvy using that, I mean, what sort of time frame would you envisage a TEL team to need to kind of become competent enough with it in order to create some of those online digital objects that you showed us earlier?
Well, to get started is maybe a couple of hours training session. I'm not contradicting anything, David. I think what I'm gelling with David here, and yes, you do need the resources, but to get started, it's really easy. You can start creating these objects in a couple of hours. The tricky thing with Xerte, and I think a couple of others, is they are not WYSIWYG. They're not what you see is what you get. So easy. I think there are some rapid authoring tools which are like creating a PowerPoint, and you can do them with no training whatsoever, and you can start making them. But the more powerful ones like Xerte and the paid for versions of H5P, I would recommend you could start immediately, but it's a learning curve and you get better at it. So what you do need to do is get uninterrupted time. It goes back to this issue of ring fencing. If you can get an afternoon or a morning, even one day a week, where you switch off your email, you don't get any interruptions, and you just develop materials on these things, I think that is the most valuable way of just improving at it and getting better at it. So getting started, easy, but it is a learning curve, and I've been doing it for months now, and I'm still learning, and I get better every time I do it, basically. So there's no short answer to the question. But yeah, the more resources you put into it, the more time you can ring fence, the better your products will be, essentially.
Sure, and I guess kind of linking a little bit to the idea of having a TEL team, maybe if as part of that TEL team you have several members of the team who are kind of learning how to use programs like this and sort of bounce ideas off each other and help each other. I guess that would be a way to move things forward rather than just sort of having one person specializing in that area.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think if you get a team together, a really great thing to be able to do is assign roles. So having someone sourcing texts, having someone storyboarding, having someone doing the design, creating the questions, then having someone on the editing process, having these chain of people and allocating roles to them is really important, and that's probably the most helpful thing you can do.
Sure. Okay, I'm just going to have a look at some of the questions that are in the chat box. I can see one from Rama Timer. The question is there a way to integrate these e-learning authoring tools to MOOCs, or are they completely separate and require students, teachers to create new accounts?
Integrate them into MOOCs. By MOOCs, I think, well, when I think of MOOCs, I'm thinking of FutureLearn and things like that, things that you do entirely by yourself. So yes, you can integrate these into pretty much any platform. So whether it's a VLE or the one that I showed you was a content management system I built myself. It was using a website builder. But you can pretty much embed the code into anything. So most of these tools will produce embeddable code, or you can just publish them as a URL and have them as standalone. The one that I showed you was I'd created a link with a URL, a button that took them to a separate site, but you can embed them. You can pretty much embed them in anything.
Yeah, and yeah, I understand Moodle is also one of those VLEs that it can be used with too.
Yeah.
Just having a quick look through to see if there are any other questions. Let's just have a look. Okay, so there's one from Deanne Carbside-Gadlow. Do materials you create in these tools ever become obsolete when the browsers update or when the software itself updates? And if so, is it just a matter of re-exporting the materials, or is there more to it? I think that's a really good question, actually, because so many software and authoring tools that we use do get updates every so often. So is there any impact on the process because of that?
No, not as far as I know. I think you've got, I mean, Xerti that we use has had several updates since I've been using it. Don't think anything ever gets defunct. I mean, presumably at some point they'll say this will only work with certain browsers, and there might be issues with things like Flash, but no, generally speaking, they'll stand the test of time. But I've only been doing it for a couple of years, so
right.
Don't hold me accountable.
Sure. That was a fantastic presentation. Really, really interesting, and certainly got me thinking as well about how we do things. As I say, we've tended to go for the more sort of document-based teaching, but I think this is really something worth exploring, particularly to kind of get more engagement out of students, to make drier kind of ideas or subjects seem a little bit more interesting. So yeah, thank you very much. Really, really interesting. And the conversation continues in Padlet. So if you want to click on the Padlet link, anybody who's watching and who's been listening to Phil's presentation, please